Hi and welcome to this course. I'm Linda Dussine, a senior grooming artist. I've worked in companies such as Framestore, Axis or Platige. With this tutorial, I'm going to show you my take on grooming a procedural carpet using Houdini. We'll go from preparing the skin geometry to rendering the final groom with a basic setup in Solaris. So first thing first, before starting anything in Houdini, I'll always make sure I've gathered my final waves that I'll keep on the side anytime on the project to be sure I'm just following the right path and not going around with what I think is great but not necessarily just looking as a reference should be. So these ones I think are really great because they're really rich and look really interesting. So for example, this one you'll see that it has a lot of variation in direction, just of bendingness, of difference of size of clumps too. So yeah, this one I think is really great. And then these ones I think are really great for more a sensation of bending of the guide. So for instance, here you can really see that as someone was just seated on the fur, so it's really interesting to see how it's flat compared to other regions, and how, for example, this little patch is the only one that is really high. And yeah, difference of variation of length. This is what I would want to have on my groom too, something that looks really realistic, and so going far away as much as possible from something that looks really CG. You need to really make sure the more information you'll have, the more variation you'll make, the more it will look just alive, and that's really what we want. So as a start for my groom, I created two geometry nodes, the one being my skin. So I created a basic little skin for my fur, and then what is important for us is to create a VDB, so something, a volume where I could then later have a collider for the hairs intersecting, going down, for example, or just intersecting with the object. So what I'll do, because it's a flat surface as a base, is that I'll create a poly extrude that I will put a bit lower to have something, because if I would put it on top of it, it would mean my groom is inside of it. So obviously I will put it lower, then I will reverse it to have the normals pointing at the right direction, and then I'll do a VDB from polygon to have then my surface as a volume. So once I have this, I cached as a first pass my geometry in case I change things. I can have an increment saved. Then I did a little transform, very tiny one, because we'll do a floor then, and I didn't want them to collide with each other. And then I did a color for me to have a differentiation and sit with my groom. So once I have that, I also did a floor geo. This is just a base grid with a VDB, and exactly the same way I did for my skin. And this will allow me for the hairs that are on the borders of my skin to not be colliding more than it should if I had a floor or something else later on. So basically that's my base. And so now we can start creating a guide groom for my guides. So this will be called carpet ship guides. And the first thing I'm going to check are the parameters at the top level. So first thing I'm going to put is my carpet skin that I'm going to drag and drop and have the outs of all my network, and then I'll have connected to my skin VDB that I've created for it. And then I won't be changing anything there because I prefer to control it in the inside and not having the guide as an input, because it will mean I have to do back and forth every time, and I don't really want to do that. So I'll just have only this thing turned to white as a preference, because if not, the color red will be multiplying with the colors I want, for example, inside. So I prefer to put it white than to have any colors that I want here. Then this is alright. I'll change the focus later. And so when I go inside, the first thing then, so I'm going to change is to break this connection and have it to the side because I won't use it. And just for preferences, as you'll see quite a lot on this tutorial, I have some color schemes that I just have always going to be useful to understand who is who when you have a bigger network. And so yeah, so what I'm going to do is then once I have that, create something. So for creating hairs, and the things that I'm going to do is to create a hurricane. Once I have that, I want an input of skin. So what I'm going to do is, instead of connecting everything, I'm working with object merge because it's easier to read if you don't want to have a spider web at the very end when you have a lot of things going on. So I'll match it with my color codes, and I'll have a null because I don't want just the guides and the input but just nothing. So just for visibility, I'll have this like this connected. And so now I can see the guides, and I'll change everything that I would have changed at the top level. I'm going to change it there. So as it's the first pass and I don't know exactly what I'm going to do at the beginning, I won't go very high on the numbers. I think I can just start with something like 2000 for now. I'll change this just for now, but I can change it later. Once I have something with a better result, I'll just remove the use guide because I'm doing it procedurally. So I'll just use this thing, and I think 8 is way too much. So I think with 5 it will be alright. And the first thing we're going to change, now that we are not doing as the method of combing guides and creating guides, we're doing it procedurally. So the things that we're using for that is the guided vect. So unless you know all the names and you wanted to type them like and do all the branching directly, what you can do if you have a doubt of how to create it, if you go to the guide process area, you can have here curve at vect, and if you click on it, obviously it will destroy my connections, but basically it will help you to have directly like how it should be. So it's pretty handy when you have a doubt when you're a beginner. So yeah, just to show you, but it is not useful for me right now. Image everything back to normal, so you can see it already puts everything like that. I just delete the mirror because I won't be using it, as I don't want to do mirroring with this thing. And the first thing I'm going to have is a skin to paint my true guides, not with this one, but with this one. My velocity, that will be the parameters of the guided vect, and then the guided vect to have it in here. So basically I'll just create this with width and color just because I like to work like that. And now what we're going to start is to do some strokes to basically say to my guide then in which direction I want the guides to go, and so have something just reading my fur. So let's do that. So once that I have something that has curves kind of everywhere, what I'll do is to start preparing my volume. So the first thing I'm going to change is to remove the surface lift for now, and I'll put it to constant as the method that I'm going to choose right now. I'll put something very low and we can start to check how it will look like. So I'm going to change maybe the width so we can see better what is going on. So as you can see right now, depending on how these parameters are going to be, it will change how it's looking. So right now something is really funky. It's because my radius is not big enough, or because I don't have enough strokes for him to understand what to do there. So it's great as a beginning anyway to understand where I'm at, and if I put it very low, I'll have better result depending on what I want to do. So if I want something very smooth, I could just do the ones that I have and put it very high and have with that. But I think I want something like a lot of variation, so I'll try to have something maybe at 0, 1. And if I see that there are guides that are still up, I know I need more information on those areas, so I can start putting it as this, as a template, and starting having more of these on the areas that I want. Okay, so now that I think I have the result that I want and I have enough variations, what I'm going to start to be doing is to add all the guide processes and things to change it, because obviously guided vect is doing some direction, but right now it's really flat. So we're going to start to add things on the actual guides. So before doing that, I'll first have a file cache to cache the directions that I've just created, because this is not very heavy, but in some cases it can be, so it's better to not have this calculating every time. Okay, so now that I've cached that, the first thing I think I'm gonna want to do is to have a length variation. So I'll put a get process on length. I'll be sure to be in multiply because I've already decided that this will be kind of the main length that I want. So in multiply, and then I'm going to have a little randomize to have a bit more realism to this. And then I'm going to start to do multiple guide processes and having some attribute paints that I'm going to paint on this side to help me drive some things here to create, for example, so the fact that there will be some areas that I want shorter or more bent, more flat, more higher, and so back and forth. So the second thing I'm going to create to be able to see better my guide as it should is to have a lift. So this will help me to have something a bit more logical. I'll just have it with a curve mask in the masking area to be able to have something that is bending as a carpet would have. Alright, so now I'm going to go back and just have a randomize again. I'm going to maybe add a bit more density to understand what is happening. Alright. Now, looking at my ref again, what I would want is maybe some areas that have more lift, for example. So let's say, for example, this kind of areas, and so we can have some maps to control the ones that are really flat and the ones that are really high. So to do that, I'm going to stop creating my maps. I'm going to have an attribute paint, and I'll change the attribute name to lift map. I have this as a template to see where I would want it to put that. And I'll change my brush as a preference to screen. So for example here, what I would want to be lifted is some little areas, so I'll try to check where I would want them to be. Okay, so this will be for my lift, and maybe then I want so the areas that we feel that someone seated on it, so I'll paint the other one for that. Checking again my ref just to be sure. So it's more on the middle, let's say, and maybe on the sides too. Now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to create the get processes for that. So this is just my lift. And then I create a bend. I'll first have the one that is really bended down, because it seems more logical in this order. So it's a skin attribute that I want for a mask, and it's the bend ones. To see my map, I'll put a curve mask and change again the curve. And add some randomization. And then now that I see that, I've figured that the lift is not enough lifted, so I'm going to change this. Okay, in order to see better the guides, I'm going to create a color node, but using the curve value attributes to be able to see the root to tip with a different color. So what I'm going to do is to put a resample without any action and just add the curve value. And then on my color, I'll just add a ramp from attributes and have it as curve value. So I can understand better now what is happening. So I think my hairs are not enough long now, so I can change that now. And what I'm seeing too is that some hairs are a bit broken. Sometimes it happens with the guide vect. It's because it doesn't have enough guides in here to understand where it's going, but also because, as you can see now, as the draw curve is just simple thing to draw, it will have a lot of points. So what I should have done before is to have a resample for this, because we don't want all these points. It will just, yeah, it's too heavy, and then it's just doing some little jittering everywhere. So we'll just have a resample for that. And so now I'll just go back and change some, well, not change, but basically add more of them, because as I can see here, it's because I'll need to have more guides here to make it fixed. If I see that, for example, these ones are really broken, what I could do too to not have too much strokes going on is to have one here where I will blast the ones that I don't want anymore, that are causing issues, and create another one where I can change the colors to differentiate them. Clear the strokes on this one. And have it merged together later. Alright, I think I cleaned most of them now, so I will recache and continue. Alright. So now that I'm kind of happy with my bend situation, what I can create now is the other one that I've just added right now with this lift. So I create another bend. For these ones, I think I'll want a bit more length on this one, so I'm just going to put another length before that. So now they will stand better, as this is shown on kind of this reference. Alright, now what we can do is to have another band, but that will control all the outline of the carpet, because right now everything is very lifted in these areas and this doesn't look very natural. So same thing, another band and another map. now that I'm happy with these two, we can start to add other guide processes again and again to add more variation. So what I think I would see right now is to have more bend but on different directions, because everything is just going too smooth right now. So I'm going to add another bend. And this time I will use another method that would, if I put this to 0 and I just jam the randomizations, just to add more variation on every direction. So as you can see, it's just, I don't want to be too drastic, it's just to have something going on. Okay, now that I have that, what we can do is to have the kind of final ones for now, at least, is to have some frizziness once you're happy with all the directions that you've created. So I think for now I will create two things, a frizz but also some curliness or waviness at least. So for that I'm going to use first the frizz and then the wave. So and once I'm happy with that, I'll create a wave. I'll just rename this just before, because I prefer to have everything very neat, because as you can see I already have all those guide processes, and then it's easy to get very lost when you try to change things afterwards. To have a wave compared to the other guide processes, for some reason if you tap wave it won't work, so I just create a guide process empty that by default will have the set direction, and I'll just set it to wave. I'm going to have to be a bit too limited with that because I don't have enough points to do what I want to achieve. So what I can do is to have a resample just before. Try to not go too high, but at least enough to have the effects that I'm trying to achieve. So as you can see, before and after it's quite drastic right now. You can maybe have something like this, and so what I could create is to have for then later my guide level 2 is that I'll create a length attribute that I'll put there because I'm sure I'm going to need it later. So to do that I'm going to create a guide mask. And I won't plug anything, I just want to go to the additional mask and create a lens mask. So as you can see, if I clamp it really high, it will just select the bigger ones. So what I'm going to do is to let it kind of like this, and before going to the guide LV2, I think I forgot to do one thing that I wanted to do, is to have some guides that are shorter than the other ones. So I'll do this right now before going to the rest. So as it's something that will control the length, I just make sure I have it on the right area. So length things should be better to do at the very start, because when you put a lot of effects, then it will just remove some of the effects that you've put it if you do that afterwards. So try to find the smartest way to add what I want to do right now. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to plug it to this. Alright, so now that I have this and I have a mask that I want to export, what I'm going to do is to clean everything to go to the LV2 guides. So the first thing I'm going to do is to check the collisions. As I can see, there is a bit of it, so I'm going to create a collide VDB. And I'll just plug the skin VDB we just created. That seems to be okay. So now that I've plugged it, I'll just check again what it did. It did some part of it, but I'll need to force it a tad again. You need to be careful using that, because if you go too strong, it will start to move everything. So it's just going with just low values. And for the rest, what is not working is because I'm doing a VDB only with my skin, but so all the hairs that I'm going on the floor, I'll need to have one for the floor too. Alright, so now the two things that I'm going to have for the clean is to have a clean node where I'm going to remove all the toggles here that normally are for geometries, but as we're doing guides, we really need to remove them to not have problems afterwards. And I'm just going to use these ones. So I'm going to have one for the attributes, because I don't want to keep some of them. If not, it's just going to make your cache bigger for nothing. Right now it's not that heavy because I'm just doing carpet, but if I was doing a bigger creature, it's great to just clean things that you're not using anymore, to be sure you're just keeping what you really need. Now that I'm happy with what I cleaned, I'll do a connectivity to have an attribute that is saved for my guide LV1, so I'm sure of when I will do simulation or any other things that you need to pass to someone else, we know that these are the guides level 1, and so these ones are driving basically all the hairs. So for the sake of it, I'm just going to rename it as I rename it normally, but like it will depend on people. And I'll put at the very end get skin attributes to be sure to remap my guides and my skin. If not, Houdini won't be happy with that. And at the very end, what you'll need is a group for that. So once we do the hairs, we can separate our guides LV1 with our 2 or 3 depending on your workflow, but I know that at least this one are separated. And this will be it for the guides LV1. You'll obviously need to go back because once you see the hairs, everything changes, and then you think that things should not be exactly as it is right now, but like at least you know you have a first base before going around for too much for nothing. So this is the first base that I'm happy with, and now I can do a guide LV2 with the guides LV1 on the next video. So we are back for the guides LV2. So what I'm going to want to reach right now is to have the subclamps that you can see when you look at the references. So for example, here as you can see, if I try to draw it, that I'll have my first clamps, for example, this or this, and then I'll have some subclamps inside of it, and so this is the things that I'm going to try to mimic. So as you can see, there are some areas that you can see only one bigger clamps, and some areas that the clamps are very tiny and you don't really see anymore what is happening, but that, yeah, that's those kind of things that we are going to try to do now. And so yeah, having those little subclamps that are breaking the main shape on the guides LV2. So back to Houdini, I'm going to create again a urgent node. Going to connect to my guides, and it's complaining because I need my skin. And so now I'm going to have as a template my guides LV1 to be sure I'm knowing how much I'm going to want to put on the guides LV2. So the first thing I'm going to do on the parameters is to remove the grow unguided hair, because now we are going to use the guides and then start to have more guides. So this will be way too much. What I'm going to put now is some color back to my guides to be sure I'm knowing what I'm seeing right now. So maybe I'll have something in there with the color. What I'm gonna do, it's maybe better, is to have my connectivity and show the attribute I just created. And some width. And now it will be easier to understand, so how much guides I'll put into the ones I have right now. So what I'm going to do to that, I'm going to put directly a clump node. So I'm going to be able to check what's happening. So what we want is to clump with our guides, so I'm going to have them on the custom one. And these are really tight, so first thing I'm going to change to on the hair clump is to have them less tight here. Okay, so I think 10,000 is kind of okay compared to, because it's more than what we had, but like, yeah, could be it. we'll have to create hairs anyway later and do back and forth, because just like that it's kind of complicated. It's just when you start to know the values and the parameters that you do most of the time, it's kind of okay, but like it's always better to test anyway with hairs to be sure what you're doing. But like right now I can see that I have enough guides for my guide LV1, but I don't have too much for it to be completely blurry, so that's pretty much what I want for now, and then we can start to add some adjustments when we want to create some variations. For now, I think I'm going to let it as it is. The first thing I'm going to do, as always, is to have a length node. And what we can do too is on the hair clump, what I should want to do is to have maybe less tightness and maybe some curliness. And that's why I created my land mask in there. So we're going to use it by transferring the guide attribute. So I'm just going to go down to the transfer guides, and I can just double check it was on the prims. And I'm also going to transfer my guide ID depth, really important to have it transferred to all the workflow to be sure it's not getting lost. So I'm just going to the depth and mask. Now I can see them, that's great. I can also have color nodes kind of everywhere to be sure it is consistent and it's the same thing as my guides. And I'll pass it also to the clump nodes. So on the attributes, I won't need those attributes because it will be something that I will need for my hairs, but like as I'm doing guides, it's kind of messing with the results that I have on my hairs, so I make sure that if I'm working with guides, I'm removing those two. And then for the attribute transfer, I'm going to transfer my depth exactly the same way to be sure everything is transferring. And so as I was doing so, the amplitude, I'm going to have it on clump attributes, and I'm going to have them driving the curls. So basically this means that the guides that will be shorter, I don't want them to have the same frequency and amplitude that the longer ones. So I'll make sure I have this like that. What I'm going to do now is to add another variation for this. So I'm going to go back to my main guides and to create something to have different areas that are not doing as much frizz as other areas. So I'm just going to go back and to have another guide mask. This time I'm going to want to create a noise. And what I will want is not to have 0 and 1, but more 0, 5 and 1. And I'm going to have them merge together. So to do that, there is different ways. What I could do is to have a wrangle node and multiply both of them together. So I want to first change into primitive because my attributes are in primitive, and then I'm going to want to create a new attribute that I will call clump mask, and I'm going to then have my noise mask multiplied by my lane mask, and it's complaining because I forgot to put this. And to be able to watch that, what you can do is to have a visualizer node and have so my clump mask, and as you can see, if I try to change those values now, those two maps are with each other, so that's what we want. That's great. I'll just remap this to be less clamped, and I'll have these unconnected, and I'll go back to my clamp then. So now that I have this, I can change this to the clamp mask. And then have something more drastic now that I have a map to control it. Okay, so now that I'm happy with what I have, what I'm going to want to create is to have other little guide processes to break up the guides LV2, and then I'll try to have a first visualization on my hairs to be sure it's kind of looking as I think it will be. Before I finish this, I'll have the same things, so a collider and a clean node, etc., to be sure everything is great and clean. And what we are going to want to do is to have those two merge together, enable to cache everything together, and then we can separate it on the hairs later on with the groups that we've created. I always like to put a little color here just to be sure that both are merged, as I don't see anything anymore, and it is okay, so great. And what I can put also here is another guide ID def color, just to be sure everything seems to be matching. Okay, so this was a viewport bug. Labs has a very neat reset viewport here if you need to, so you don't have to open new scene view little panels every time. So, okay, this seems to be the same thing that we had there. And everything is matching, so we can go and start to do test hairs now. So for the hairs, what I'm going to do is to create a network in here on the side and recreate another hair gen and everything kind of the same. Just now I'm going to need to have the guides as an input again, so here I'll duplicate this with Alt, but now I'll put it's my guides. Okay, like this. So to start the same thing, I'll add a lot of density, not that much because the point here is just to test the hairs and not to have like the final density or anything. So what I'm going to do is to have, I'll double check because something is broken again I think on the viewport, so just gonna do again a reset viewport. I think it's fixed now, I can continue. It's because I was displaying it on the top level, so obviously it was doing it 2 times, so we make sure that when we were working on a thing and we are displaying everything, we need to untoggle this. So I'm going to have something maybe like this for now, enough to understand what is happening, but not too much to be just for a test. So once I have that, I don't want to go too much in detail in changing everything because in the end it's just a test for now. So I'll put something more realistic, so for it to look like hairs and not just guides like where we don't really care the thickness it is. So now that I have that, first thing I'm going to create is a clump node. And I'll plug my guides, but this time not just the guide like that because we have 2 subclumps. So what I'm going to want to do is to separate the clumps LV1 and clump LV2. So I'm actually not going to take a null but more blast, and I'm going to want to take my guide LV1 but just them and not the LV2 and plug that to the custom clump base. So now as you can see it's only clumping with my clump LV1, and as by default is very tight, the first thing I'm going to do is to untight those ones, have a bit less tightness. And for the hairs, depending on your character, how you want to be very following exactly the guides. For example, when you have stylized guides for feature animation or things like that, it might be better to have extrude and blend because it will be very precise on the guide's shape. It will still be precise with linear blend, but it will be kind of bit more smooth. So yeah, it depends on, it's a bit of back and forth too to see what just works better. It could change even along the way. Like for instance, I pretty much had a V1 and then I figured that this would work better in the end, so it will depend. For now, I think I want to stay to linear and blend. Have something like this, and then have the other clump node for the gates LV2. This time I will invert it. same thing. I'll try to have this a tad less tight. And now maybe add a bit more hairs to see something. So as you can see now, once I have those big shapes, the clamps LV2 that are there, I'm going to start breaking it. And the second thing we're going to do now is that we see a visualization of how it would look, and you're kind of happy with your directions and all. We're going to get back to the guides LV1 and start to paint our density guides. So as on the reference, we can have the areas that have less guides to have bigger clamps, and some areas that are more smooth. And so you can see it will mean there is more guides LV1 here because we want more smaller guides and smaller clamps. So we'll start doing this right now. Okay, now let's test it out. Now I think I'm kind of happy with it. There is some areas that will be way more clamps and some areas with lesser of them. And here now I'll have too much subclamps. It will start to be very blurry, so I'm going to lower that too. So as you can see, compared to before, we have bigger clamps. We can start to see better how it's subdivided and broke up. I think the areas that I wanted more clamps are not enough in terms of difference. So I tried to add a tad more in the areas, for example here where I see it was very flat, and we can then start to create our hairs. Now I think I'm happier, and then what will be controlling the rest is more the tightness of it, etc. So I won't, in terms of clump, I think I'm kind of happy now. Yeah, let's go to the rest. So what I'm going to create now that I'm there is my hairgen. So what I'm going to do is even copy that to have a first base and not have to recreate all the nodes, and go now to creating a hairgen. That will be called so the same garbage ship as this time, and I'll do some color code now that I'm here. Something like this. I'll make sure it's not displayed and go inside of it. So same thing as the guide groom, depending on company's workflow, just way of working, same as the guide groom, either you let these ones connected with the input of hairs and change everything in those top levels, but just for the sake of the video, because it's just quicker and I don't have to go back and forth, and I prefer this method anyway, I'll have this breaking the connection, have it on the side, have my color code, and have a hairgen like this instead of having the top level things connected. So I'm going to start by doing the inputs, because this won't work because it was renamed on the guide groom. So first I'm going to do is to have those with a null, like this, and have them renamed to I'll have the hairs right now there, and I'll put it once I have a result at the very end, but just right now, do not have it to plug it every time. I'll have it up for now. And the first thing I'm going to do is, because I forgot to plug the VTB and the guides, so as for the guide groom, first thing I'm going to do is to have my groom objects, my guides here, and my VTB. Can either tap it like that or just drag and drop it and then add South VTB. And now I think we're ready for now. So I'll go back inside. I'll check this. Everything is great now. So back to what I was doing, I'll maybe add a tad more density now that I'm really doing hairs, not too much anyway, because at the very end when rendering, to have this fluffiness we'll have to put way more, but just for right now and to have a visualization, I'm gonna just let it not that heavy. I'm gonna check again if everything is alright. And I'm going to start breaking it up. So the first thing I'm going to do is having some modifications before the guide LV1. So this means The hairs are not that flat at the very beginning. So the first thing I'm going to create is a bend node. I'm going to have them longer than it should, because once you start to have a lot of clumps, what's happening is that I found that the hairs are just with this option that is doing some difference of length by itself. It's like starting to be less and less short, so long, I mean. So the first thing I do is just having something longer with randomization, but just a bit longer, because I know it's always what is happening. So just like this, some bend, and then once I see my clump, so as you can see, if I try to hide those two, so as you can see, it will add just more differentiations. Even if it's a tad, it's already great. Well, this will be useful later, but yeah, just to have something happening. It's maybe not enough, we could have more, but yeah, it was just break the clump LV1 a bit. So going back to this, what we can do is to have a color node to see better what's happening. So I have my own custom one, but it's exactly what I've shown before with the curve view. So as you can see, it's much more better to see what is happening. So what I'm going to change is the crossover rate. That we need to be very careful with that, because basically what it's doing is changing some guides from a clump to the other clump. So if you put it very high, it starts to do some really big issues for later. So it's great because it gives some variation, but like this makes no sense. Like it's better to control it with stray hairs, but not like that. Now, between each clumps, I'm going to create another modifiers to break the silhouette still. What we can check too is to have a color node but with the clump attribute, so we can see it with clumps, so it can be easy to read to where it is each clump. So right now it's not working because the first thing I need to do is to have the guide ID def passed along the other hairs. I'll go back to the color now, just because it's easier to read how it looks like. And with this one, same thing. I'm going to break it up a bit, so crossover rate, some stray hairs, you see, as you can see now, maybe the length is really helping to not lose too much of the length of the overall shape of it. Now same thing, we can add again some frizz, some bend to break it up between each clumps. I think I'll have a bit too much of guides for the subdiv one because I don't see enough breakups. Like not enough, at least for what I like. So here for example it's great, but I don't know, I'll try with a tad less guides again. And what we're going to start to add to is tightness maps to have some clumps that are way less tight than other areas. Maybe it's because I didn't add the density guides too. This will obviously help. Okay, so now I'm going to create my tightness map. So I'm going to start to test it on my hairs too. I'll have another one to not have everything just being the same thing because I'm going to lose too much details and I want my clump levels too to be still more clumped. So I think I'm just going to remap the one I had. And I think I'll need to touch up this area because I don't like the fact that there is too much defined clump there, so I'll have to calm that down. So instead of creating another map, as I already want this base but just a bit more different in some areas but still the same, what I'm going to do is to create an attributary map. And I'll have it so original name tightness map to have the same base and then my new name. So for example tightness to map. and now I can clamp. I want this one to be, yeah, still with more clamps, but just the same information. So now I can start to paint also my density map for my hairs. What I can see already is that I need to be careful with the areas where there is shorter hairs in general, like it's happened also with human hairs and all, where you will have shorter hairs, it will then be more straight. So it also means that you'll need more density in those areas to be able to be more dense, because if not, it just look a bit patchy and just a bit weird. So I need to be focusing a denser map on those areas, and then I can be able to cheat on, for example, this patch that is longer and just more bent. I can be able to cheat it with less hairs in general to not be just too expensive. Areas also that will need this effect is the areas where you have kind of a parting going on, because the hole where there is a parting, it will be very much just pass through compared to areas that have not this effect. What I think now is that I will need still more guides to in there, or at least it still is a tad too tight. But yeah, once I figure this out, I'll be going back to painting my density map for my hairs. Great, so now that I have my density map, I'm going to focus again a lot of back and forth to have something more refined in areas. Like for example here, I see now that my clumps are a bit not enough, and it's just beautiful to watch. And yeah, I'm not really happy 100% with the look of the things. Maybe it's just the length in general, so I'll need to have a length less drastic on those areas, for example, or maybe a bit longer in general to have the same feeling as my ref. And once it's done and I'm more happy with it, I have the last clump more procedurally that I'll add to the very end to refine the overall. So now that I'm in a better place and I'm kind of happy with where I am, I can add my last, at least for this project, clump. So I'm going to add it there. I'm just not going to use the clump custom now because I just want to have some procedural clumps for the little ones. I'm going to add linear blend, and this time I'm going to just untoggle only clump within existing clumps to add more clumps and not following exactly what already was there, and just going to have the clump size down and do back and forth with it to see the results that I'd like. For this one, most of the time I will remove the preserve blend difference because I think I want to be able to see the clump better and not with a lot of randomization. But what I'll do is to have a length to control it on my end. It's going to create kind of the same look, but I'm going to be able with this to control how much length variation I want, compared to this one where I can't have access to that basically and say I like what it's doing, but it's just too drastic. So as you can see now, if I had in comparison this one with the preserved length and the ones that I just did, so I'll have still length variation going on, but just controlled by how much I want it on my end. And I think I can even add another clump actually, but very very thin for the last one, and I'll add a frizz there to break it up between the two. I'm going to go back to change the seed on the guys because I don't really like what is happening there, but yeah, then I'm going to finish my hairs and cleaning everything. Okay, so back to the last step, so cleaning the collider, the attributes, and do some for exporting, for shading. So I'm just going to add a nil. I forgot to put a last little frizz to have something there. Okay, great. So I'll add now the nail just to split what is my hair work and the rest of it. So I can do first actually my shading one. So this will mean that from this area I'm going to start to add some exports of attributes. So there, for example, the ones that are very common that I like to do is with guide masks. The first one will be a ramp to control along the curve the colors, if you're doing like tie and dye hair colors in people, or for me it will be to add a bit more depth on the groom, so having the base darker than the tips. So in order to do that, I'll rename this ramp and I'm going to make it SHD to shading. And as it's a ramp, you need to put it to point to have the curve mask. If not, it will not appear in there. I'm going to let it by default, so I can just clamp it on my side in shading, but what I can do is to copy it to the side, so I can like have it as a temp to understand what I was going to want to do with that, basically, but like it's just optional. Then the second one that I like to do is a length SHD. So this one will be to be able to separate, if it's needed, the shorter hairs to the longer ones and create some differentiation. The last one that I'm going to create for this is to copy back the clump ID to have differentiations of depending on clumps. So I'm going to check. I don't want the big one like this because for this case it won't be useful, but I have maybe the last one or the one before, so I'll check how it looks like. So this one will be a bit better. We see some patchiness, so it will create something that is not just based on each trend, but more something more precise, but still a bit chunky. So I think I like this one. So in order to do that, I'm going to have a transfer attribute. So I create an attribute swap. We don't want to swap, but to copy in this case. And so what I want to do is, it's in primitive, so source clump ID, and I want to keep it, so I will export it as clump ID SHD for me. And then this will have it transferred, so instead of putting clump ID here, I'll have it clump ID SHD. I'll have another color node that just check everything just got transferred well. So now that I'm happy with all of this, I'm going to create another null, this time for cleaning. Same thing as before, collide. Great, and to do is to have maybe a combination of resample and refine. Right now I'm not happy with what it's doing, so I prefer to let just a refine. But yeah, I would have passed more time on maybe having a mask for the shorter ones and the longer ones and have it as a resample or things like that. But yeah, just for the sake of a project, I think I'm just going to use a refine. Okay, I think I'm gonna let it like that. And I'll put back my output. Okay, everything is clean. So I'm going to save everything now. So first thing, I'll save the project. I'll save my guides. So here I didn't change the path, I'll change it now. And on the hairs, even if these ones does not work anymore, there are still some that will need to change. So for example, the attributes, here you can have all the output attributes you're going to export. So even though we decided which ones inside of it, it's important to be able to pick them there. If not, it will export only the ones that we see there. So now that we have our hairs done, we're going to be able to move to Solaris. So the first thing I'm going to do is to have a little export just to be able to pick with a separated node for export of things. So I'm just going to create a geo. I'm going to call it Solaris. And then once I have that, I can go to Solaris. So now in order to work with Solaris, the first thing I'm going to do is to change the network. So we're going to stage, and I'm going to change this to the Solaris panel. Go back to stage. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to create the things that we need. So first importing our things. So in order to do that, we're going to use something that is called subimport. Here I'm going to specify what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go search on my obj Solaris because it's easier now to pick it up like that. And this one will be my skin. And in order to view everything in Solaris, you need to keep in mind that everything needs to be merged and seen together. So whether you do it like this or like this, I prefer doing it like this for different things. Now that I have these two, I'm going to create a material library. So this will serve me to gather all my materials and then something to assign them. So as you can see, now that I've created this thing, it starts to appear what it's what. Right now, as I didn't rename them, they have these funky names. So what we can do is go back for a second in the object network, sub, and go back to Solaris. That's why I like to create this in order to be clean, be easier to understand what is being exported, and then doing the changes that I want. So right now what I want to do is to create a name node. So here how it's done is that my attribute will be name, and then it will be picking up the names that I wanted for this object. So going back to Solaris now, I see that everything got renamed. And so now I'm going to assign my materials. So in order to do that, I'm going to first create default ones. So now I can go here and assign my materials. Okay, so now that these are assigned, I'm going to create my camera. And some lights now. And at the end, I'll add the camera runner settings to be able to have my own settings and not the one by default. Okay, so this is the basic colors that Material gave us. I'm going to start to put a default color for the fur skin. And I'll go back to what interests us the most, so the Karma fur. So the first thing I'm going to do is to have my melanin to 0. I'm going to remove the redness too. Maybe have a tad of randomization. And what we're going to start to have is to check our attributes that we've exported. For that, I'm going to create something called a geometry property value. So the first one we can check is, for example, the ramp. I'm going to have a mix. And then have a ramp. So now that everything is connected, I'm going to clamp it a lot just to understand if it's working and if everything looks fine. I think it is. So now this will be our first test. So what I like to do is testing first all my attributes, having a screenshot of it, and then once I'm happy, I can start to put the colors that I want. And for the clump one, it's a bit different because it's not a float, it's an integer attribute. So I'm going to change it there to integer. And for it to work, I'm going to have to create a random So once I'm happy with all of these, I'm going to make them all together. To having something with a more saturation, what it can do is to have a melanin blend between the ones that are lighter than the rest. So I'm going to create another mix. Basically what it's going to do is just to multiply the colors of the melanin with the colors that we've added, so it's better to stay with very tiny values because we still want to multiply it kind of with white because most of the thing is controlled with custom colors, so it's just in order to add some saturation but not literally looking at that. Well, it would be too much anyway, but like adding color with the melanin because if not it's going to blend two things and we will be less control with the colors that we've added. Okay, so I've tweaked a bit my lights and all just to have something that looks better. Kind of now that I'm happy and I know where it's going, I'm going to have the density increased and I'll be able to have back and forth with the one before. Now I see a better idea of how it's looking. I'm going to start coming down my maps. So for example, the map of clump IDs that I've created. Alright, so I think that's it for the tutorial. These are the two images that I've just rendered for you to see how it looks like. And yeah, I pretty much changed only two things. So the first one being on the settings here. By default, it is fixed size, so I've passed it to render setting prim to be able to pick the resolution that I had here. And then removing all the motion blur, enable depth of field there. And I didn't do it this time, but in case your hair is not enough sampled on the sub imports, you can go to geometry handling and you can press this one, treat polygon as subdivision surfaces, in case it's not enough sampled in terms of curves. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I think here it is for the end of the tutorial, and thanks for watching.